Suzanne, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Ugart, you were asked by Mr. Houle, the Crown Attorney, about what you were doing and saying as you were running from that distance 100 meters away to the point of the altercation between initially Officer Fantasia and Mr. Friedbrain. Do you remember Mr. Houle asking you those questions?
Yes.
And in the answers that you gave, you left the impression with this court, I'm going to suggest, or you tried to leave the impression with this court, that you were continually yelling, "Police, stop," as you were running from 100 meters away to the point of the altercation, correct?
Yes.
All right. You remember, well, you have your notes in front of you, correct? Right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor, again, please?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a copy of your notes too, officer, and I just want to refer you to that part of your notes that talk about you running forward from 100 meters away. I'm looking at the second page of your notes. There was a brief struggle and both got to their feet. I was running toward them yelling, "Police, stop." That's what you put in your notes, correct?
Yes.
You didn't put in your notes continually.
No, not specifically.
No, because you only said it once.
It's a yelling, as in a continuous process.
Your notes would leave us with the impression that you said it once. Would you agree?
I was saying it multiple times.
But your notes don't say that.
Under my understanding of yelling while running, it is continuous motion.
And the last time you yelled it must have been at least before you were 20 meters away. Again, looking at your notes. I was still about 20 meters away when I saw the now accused punch the officer in the face, correct?
Yes.
So the last time, if in fact you said it more than once, the last time you said it, you were still at least 20 meters away, correct?
That's correct.
No way of knowing from what you saw or heard that the accused had heard you say it at all, had heard you say the words, "Police, stop." Would you agree?
That'd be reasonable.
Thank you. Now, in terms of how things went down between Officer Fantasia and Mr. Friedbrain, you have no idea what they said.
That's correct.
But it was obvious that it was animated.
Yes.
They were obviously upset with one another.
Yes.
It wasn't animated in a good way, like, "Hi, how are you? It's nice to see you." It was angry.
Yes.
Right. And what you saw, or claimed to have seen Mr. Friedbrain do, was kick and punch at Officer Fantasia, right?
Correct.
Not push him, kick and punch.
Correct.
Right. And later on, as Mr. O'Brien, the accused before the court, got involved, you heard nothing in terms of any words that were passed between them, correct?
Correct.
You never heard Officer Fantasia in any way identify himself as a police officer, did you?
No, I did not.
No. You heard someone yell, "Get off it."
Correct.
And logically, we can assume that that was Mr. O'Brien, right?
Safe, yes.
Sure. And immediately after, 1 or 2 seconds later, after hearing Mr. O'Brien say, "Get off him," you see Mr. O'Brien grab Officer Fantasia by the collar and pull him off, right?
Correct.
Right. And what that obviously looked like to you is a citizen involving himself in a physical altercation between two people who at least dressed or looked like people who were drug users in the park, right?
He didn't necessarily have to be just an average citizen. He could have been known to the accused.
Right, he could have been, but you have no way of knowing that. You have no prior knowledge that Mr. O'Brien knew that Officer Fantasia was a cop.
No, no prior knowledge.
And Officer Fantasia was deliberately dressed like a person who was there in the park to buy drugs. That was his cover, right?
Reasonably so.
Sure. So what this citizen, Mr. O'Brien, sees is two drug users fighting, right?
Yes.
And it was obvious because Fantasia was on top that he was getting the better of it, right?
True.
Right. And so Mr. O'Brien intercedes to avoid the continued altercation that Officer Fantasia is getting the better of, right?
Yes.
Right. And then what happens next is the two of them, Officer Fantasia and Mr. O'Brien, get up off the ground, and they're standing there, correct?
Correct.
And then you see Mr. O'Brien strike Officer Fantasia in the ground.
Yes.
Or, I'm sorry, strike him in the face, excuse me. Strike him in the face, right?
Correct.
Right. And you heard nothing said between the two of them before that?
Correct.
But what you did see, I'm going to suggest, is Officer Fantasia reaching into his pocket. Isn't that right?
Pardon me? Can you repeat that?
You saw, before Mr. O'Brien struck Officer Fantasia in the face, I'm going to suggest that if you were watching what happened, you saw Officer Fantasia reach into his pocket.
I can't say I saw that.
Well, were you watching what happened?
I did not see that. I was watching, but I did not see that.
But you somehow claim to have not seen Officer Fantasia reach into his pocket.
I did not see Officer Fantasia reach into his pocket.
He's already testified that he did reach into his pocket.
Well,
I wasn't here. I don't know.
That's besides the point. The officer has indicated now on several occasions what he saw and what he didn't see.
I agree, except can Mr. Marley not put the proposition to this witness in these terms? If Officer Fantasia has already testified that he reached into his pocket, can you disagree with that, or words to that effect? Is that a proper cross-examination?
Well, I don't think it is at this point because the officer's already indicated that he didn't see it.
I understand
You've got the evidence from Officer Fantasia. As Your Honor is very well aware, witnesses are going to see and hear things very differently. This officer has testified to that. Really, is there anything that hinges on that at this point? Because you've already got the evidence from
Mr. Marley,
Officer Fantasia.
I mean, if this officer said, I did not see what you suggested the other officer said, of what use is it if this officer is told that the other officer already had testified to that? I know that, you know that, Mr. Houle knows that. So unless you're going to suggest that this officer going to call the other officer a liar, which I doubt, I'm not sure it has any relevance.
It has this relevance in my respectful submission. The gentleman claims to have seen the altercation.
Right.
And yet he doesn't see something which Officer Fantasia has already admitted he did. It ought to leave you with some question as to the reliability of the observations of this officer.
I don't have any problem with that, but asking this officer, I agree that that's an inference open to me, but asking this officer if he saw the other one, how does that assist? We already know that Officer Fantasia said, I was reaching in, and really in effect what he said, I was reaching in to get my badge or my identification, but didn't get a chance to show it before I was punched. And so if this officer didn't see it, I don't know that pointing out that Officer Fantasia testified to it affects his knowledge, unless I would think if he was trying to advance the Crown's case, he might say, yeah, I saw him trying to pull out his identification. I know where you're going is what your client apprehended when Officer Fantasia admittedly reached into his pocket. All right, but I don't know that it advances anything to confront this officer with Officer Fantasia's testimony.
It may be, if Your Honor has already taken the point, whether you accept it ultimately or not, but have taken the point that this gentleman claims to have seen it all but didn't see that, then I will leave. Perhaps I've gone too far. I will carry on. One other area of questioning for this witness, if I might, Your Honor, please. At the end of your examination in chief, Officer Ugart, Mr. Houle ultimately got you to repeat what Mr. O'Brien said to you following his arrest, specifically that he saw that cop pummeling the other one. All right? Those are the words that you say Mr. O'Brien said, correct?
Correct.
And if you just read those words or consider those words on their face, he saw that cop pummeling the other one, you might think that the other one was meaning the other cop. But you know that Mr. O'Brien didn't mean that, right?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
I'll ask a question a different way.
And again,
I'm not sure.
He's asking this witness ultimately to say what is in the head of another witness.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Sorry, let me try a different question. What you said to Mr. O'Brien before he said those words is you told the accused to stop, right?
Yes.
You told the accused that Officer Fantasia was a police officer, right?
Correct.
And you also told Mr. O'Brien that the other person, meaning Mr. Friedbrain, had escaped as a result of his interference, correct?
Correct.
Right. So before Mr. O'Brien ever says the words that he saw that cop pummeling the other one, before he ever says those words, you've told him that Officer Fantasia was a cop, correct?
Correct.
And that Mr. Friedbrain was somebody who, at least in your mind, Officer Fantasia was lawfully pursuing, correct?
Correct.
Right. So before he says those words, you'd given him that information, correct?
Correct.
But from everything you recall about this event, you have no way of knowing that Mr. O'Brien knew that Officer Fantasia was a cop before you told him.
That's correct.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Re-exam, Mr. Holmes?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you, officer.
Thank you.